After I declined to relinquish my inheritance to my mother, she invited me to what she called a family meeting. Upon arrival, I discovered that it was nothing of the sort. Instead, 2 attorneys were waiting, prepared with legal documents intended to pressure me into signing over the majority of what rightfully belonged to me. As they slid the papers across the table, I smiled calmly and said, "Interesting. I brought someone too. My name is Danielle, I'm 29 years old, and this is the story of how my own mother attempted to ambush me with legal pressure in an effort to seize my inheritance, only for the plan to unravel completely. Even now, I'm still reeling from how everything unfolded, but for the first time in years, I feel empowered. To fully understand, let me start from the beginning. I come from a deeply complex family background. I was raised by my mother, her second husband Greg, and my younger half-brother Tyler. My biological father passed away when I was 10 years old. His death was a profound loss. He was my anchor, my advocate, the only person who truly made me feel seen and valued. Not long after his passing, my mother remarried. Greg was not abusive, but I would never describe him as kind. At best, he tolerated me. His clear preference was for Tyler, his biological son, and over time my mother mirrored this favoritism. I gradually came to understand that I was merely a leftover piece from a previous life, someone they were obliged to house but not love. Throughout my teenage years, I faded into the background, except when they needed something. During college, I juggled 2 jobs, managed a full course load, and still found ways to send money home whenever Tyler hit a rough patch. My mother often called me in tears, claiming they couldn't manage his behavior or expenses. Each time I gave in, hoping that being a dutiful daughter would one day earn me their appreciation. That day never came. When my paternal grandfather passed away last year, everything shifted again. Despite the family tension, he had always maintained a relationship with me. I hadn't realized until the will was read just how significant that bond had been, or how substantial his estate was. He left everything to me. The house, his financial investments, savings, and personal assets, altogether amounting to nearly $900,000. I wept when the lawyer read his letter to me. In it, he explained that he had witnessed how my mother and Greg treated me and wanted to provide me with the security and autonomy they never would. When I shared the news with my mother, her demeanor transformed. She became unusually affectionate, offering unsolicited advice about how to manage such a large sum. I was polite but clear. This inheritance was entrusted to me, and I would manage it independently. That's when the manipulation began. First came the guilt trips. How could I keep all that money when my family was struggling? Didn't I care about Tyler's new business venture or Greg's worsening back problems, which prevented him from working? Then the pressure intensified. One evening, my mother calmly suggested that I transfer the funds into a family trust, with her as the administrator. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. When I refused, the harassment began. Greg began messaging me. Tyler sent passive-aggressive texts. Even distant relatives started calling to accuse me of selfishness. I decided to go no contact for several weeks. During that time, I consulted with both my lawyer and a financial advisor. I secured my assets, transferred my funds to a protected account, updated all my passwords, and ensured that the deed to my grandfather's home was legally and solely in my name. Then, just last weekend, I received a group message from my mother. She proposed a family meeting, insisting it was time for an adult conversation. Despite my instincts, I agreed. I thought perhaps they wanted to air their grievances or even apologize. I planned to remain composed, speak my truth, and leave. Instead, I walked into something far more calculated. The meeting was held at Greg's office, a detail that should have raised alarms. I arrived in simple attire, a blouse and jeans, confident but cautious. Inside, I found not just my mother, Greg, and Tyler, but 2 lawyers seated across the table, with legal documents at the ready. Froze. My mother rose to her feet, wearing that saccharine smile I had come to recognize over the years. Her signature expression whenever she was orchestrating something manipulative. "Danielle, sweetheart, we're just here to talk," she cooed. These attorneys are simply here to help guide the process. I narrowed my eyes. What process? Yes. That's when one of the lawyers slid a folder across the table. Inside was a formal legal agreement. It proposed that I relinquish 80% of my inheritance into a newly created family trust, managed entirely by my mother and Greg. I would be granted a modest monthly allowance, doled out at their discretion. The rationale: to ensure equitable distribution and protect me from impulsive or irresponsible spending. I didn't open the folder. I didn't speak. I simply looked at the three of them, my mother, Greg, and Tyler, each seated with a disturbing air of entitlement. Tyler had even leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, radiating smug satisfaction as if the outcome was already secured. I inhaled slowly, then smiled. "Interesting," I said calmly, "because I brought someone too." Right on cue, the door behind me opened. In walked Marcia, my attorney. She was poised, composed, and carrying a thick binder filled with neatly organized documents. Their confidence evaporated instantly. Faces that had been smirking turned stiff and pale. I introduced her and then sat down, composed. Marcia made her way to the head of the table and addressed the room with cool authority. "Before any discussion proceeds, my client has asked me to review the documents being presented and evaluate whether undue pressure is being applied. From the outset, this meeting raises significant legal and ethical concerns." My mother flushed bright red. Greg began to stammer. Tyler looked as though the ground had just shifted beneath him. But Marcia was far from finished. She placed several documents on the table: notarized copies of my grandfather's will, legal proof of asset transfers, and confirmation that the entire estate had been lawfully inherited by me, without contingencies, trusts, or shared claims. She concluded with measured precision. "This inheritance is the sole and legal property of my client. Any attempt to acquire or divert it under coercion may constitute financial abuse and fraud. Be advised, if any such attempts persist, we will not hesitate to pursue legal action." The room fell into stunned silence. My mother finally broke it, attempting to recover her narrative. She insisted I didn't understand what I was doing, that they were merely trying to help me handle things responsibly. But the facade had shattered. I rose to my feet, looked directly at her and said, "You've treated me like an outsider for as long as I can remember. You never protected me, never supported me. And now you want to take from me what was never yours to begin with. I won't let you." Then I walked out and I didn't look back. I wish I could say that was the end of it, that they accepted the outcome and left me alone. But it wasn't. The very next day, I received an alert regarding a failed attempt to access my online banking account. What followed was an onslaught of aggressive communication. Hostile texts from Tyler, vaguely threatening voicemails from unknown numbers, and fraudulent emails masquerading as legal notices. One message from Tyler read, "You really think you're untouchable? That money belongs to this family. Grandpa was out of it, you know that. If you don't fix this, you'll regret it." I didn't reply. I forwarded it directly to Marcia. That point, something inside me shifted. The shock began to give way to fury. For most of my life, I had minimized myself to avoid conflict, stayed silent to maintain peace, said yes when I wanted to scream no, gave until I was empty for a family that only valued me when I had something to offer. But now, for the first time, I held something they couldn't extract. And it was unraveling them. Marcia moved quickly. We issued cease and desist letters to my mother, Greg, and Tyler. Any further communication would trigger restraining orders and potential criminal charges. In parallel, we launched a fraud investigation with my bank. The unauthorized login attempt was traced, unsurprisingly, to an IP address originating from Greg's office. They were sloppy. They were desperate. And most of all, they underestimated me. I had hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Roughly a week later, I returned home from the grocery store and noticed a vehicle idling across the street. It was Greg's truck. He didn't approach the door. No one exited the vehicle. But the message was clear. It was an intimidation tactic, a silent warning. I contacted the police, filed an additional report, and forwarded the incident to Marcia. She advised me to consider installing a security system. I went a step further. I installed surveillance cameras around the property, changed every lock, and adopted a trained guard dog. I named him Diesel. He's gentle and affectionate, until he detects a threat. Then, he becomes something else entirely. A few days later there was a knock at my front door. I checked the camera. It was my mother. Alone. I almost didn't answer. But something in me craved closure. A final confrontation, a last chance to meet her gaze without fear or need. When I opened the door she looked older. Worn down. But not remorseful. "Danielle," she began, her tone soft, rehearsed. "I know things got out of hand. We were scared. Tyler's business is failing. Greg hasn't worked in months. We thought if we could just talk, maybe you'd see we're not the enemy." That word, enemy, lodged itself in my mind. I remained silent. She continued speaking. She talked about how difficult things had become, how I didn't understand what it meant to support family, how my grandfather had been mistaken to leave everything solely to me. And then she said it. "You don't deserve all of it, Danielle. You're just one person. Tyler has a family to think about. Greg and I are drowning in debt. We thought you loved us enough to share." I took a breath, steady and sure, and responded with something I had never said to her before. Not in anger, not in tears. Just clarity. "No, Mum. You don't get to guilt me anymore. You don't get to act like the victim when all you've done is manipulate, steal, and lie. You left me emotionally years ago. Grandpa saw that. That's why he left it to me. And whether you accept it or not, I'm done playing the scapegoat." She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. And maybe she was. The version of me who would have pleaded for harmony, who would have bent to keep the peace. That version no longer existed. Close the door. The following day, a letter arrived from a different law firm. They were attempting to challenge the will, claiming my grandfather had been mentally incompetent when he amended it. I laughed aloud. He had revised his will twice in the final 2 years of his life, each time under medical supervision and with legal witnesses. Marcia drafted a 20-page rebuttal in record time. We countered with a formal warning. If they pursued this further, we would sue for emotional distress, attempted fraud, and defamation. That's when everything went quiet. No more text. No more unannounced visits. No more ominous vehicles stationed outside my home. It appeared they had finally come to terms with the truth. They had lost. But the emotional cost lingered. Began therapy. Years of gaslighting, emotional neglect, and misplaced loyalty had left scars I had never truly faced. For the first time I gave myself permission to grieve, not just the loss of my grandfather, but the childhood I had been denied. I mourned the little girl who spent years striving to earn love that was never freely given. I let go of the illusion of family I had clung to for far too long. And slowly I began to rebuild. I renovated my grandfather's home and moved in permanently. I planted a garden. I began hosting dinners with friends, individuals who felt more like family than my blood relatives ever had. I donated a portion of the inheritance to organizations that support youth aging out of dysfunctional households. I started my own business, something I had long dreamed of but never believed I had the right to pursue. Till now. As for my mother, Greg, and Tyler, through a distant cousin, I heard that Greg was forced to sell his truck. Tyler's business failed. My mother is now renting out rooms in their house to make ends meet. They continue to spin their narrative, that I stole what belonged to the family, that I'm selfish, cold, ungrateful. But I've made peace with their version of the story. Because the truth is, I didn't just inherit wealth. I inherited freedom. The freedom to choose peace over dysfunction. The freedom to say no. To walk away. To never return. And that, more than anything, is what they'll never forgive me for.